Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of our weekly Exploring the Parasha class with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz and Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
Here we are. We are in Parashat Achrei. The first part of the part is about Yom Kippur. That's pretty much all of chapter 16. And again, like for those of us who are missing Yom Kippur dearly or not, right? It's not the Yom Kippur that you know and love when you stand and sit and daven and shul all day and don't eat anything. We've got goats and mountains and burning clothes and all sorts of exciting stuff. But we're not going to talk about that. Chapter 17 also talks about sort of various sacrificial rites, but I don't really want to talk about dashing the blood against the altar this morning, even though Rabbi Schatz is wearing a lovely red, so it would match her outfit. Is that red? What color did I call that shirt?
It is orange, but we can keep going.
It's sort of a, it looks reddish on the thing. Okay. More red than orange to me, but I could also get my addict. So we're gonna work with the beginning of chapter 18 with a couple of verses that I would say seem to be fairly straightforward, but upon further unpacking, I think have some really interesting pieces to offer. I would go so far as to say, as I was taking a closer look at these verses, I think one of the primary goals of religion and spirituality can be found in one of these verses. So that's how I will tee up what we're going to be looking at. Rabbi Schatz, do you know where I'm going with that? Do you have any guesses?
I actually don't.
Do you ever have any idea where I'm going with this?
No.
Okay, great. So we're going to move into our verses. So chapter starts, Vaydaber Adonai Moshe Lemar. We know that. Speaketh unto the people of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. We're going to be focusing on verses 3 and 5 out of chapter 18. K'maaseh Eretz Mitzrayim asher yeshavtem ba. So as the practices of the land of Egypt in which you were dwelling, lo tasu, don't do those things. Whatever they did in Egypt, don't do that. Uchmaaseh Eretz Canaan asher ani mevi etchem shama. Lo tasu. And the stuff that they do in the land of Canaan that I'm bringing you to, don't do that stuff either. Uvchukotehem lo telechu. And do not, literally translated, do not walk according, don't do those things, and according to their statutes, their laws, don't walk in those ways. Et mishpatai ta'asu. The et chukotai tishmeru, but rather you should. I'll read the translation, I guess, because we could play with the words. You should observe my rules and follow my laws. In the translation, you see like my rules alone, because presumably it's sort of like reading the context in there, right? Because in verse 3 it's saying, don't do those things, rather just do the things that I am commanding to you. Lalechet bahem, to walk in those ways. Ani Adonai Elohechem, I am the Lord your God. Ushmartem et chukotai vet mishpotai. So seems to be getting a little repetitive here, but as we know, nothing is in the Torah by accident. Everything is in there on purpose. Rather, you should keep my laws and my rules, asher yaseh otam ha'adam v'chai bahem, that a person should do them and he should live by them. Ani Adonai, I am the Lord. Seems to be fairly straightforward, or is it? That was my segue.
To doing Kushia?
Yeah, that was my segue.
Okay, very good.
I thought it was a good segue.
Yeah, no, that was great.
Not a good segue?
It was great.
Okay.
Okay, yes, Renee, any good questions that people have about these three verses?
I mean, I think I know the answer, but what rules and what laws are we supposed to observe? It doesn't specify it in this.
Yeah. So, okay, great. Let's take all the kushio and then we can get to them, and see if we answer them. But yes, it's not clear to us which rules and which laws, just that we should keep the ones that are ours and not follow the ones that are not ours. Other kushiot about these verses? Yeah, Nancy.
So kind of piggybacking on that, what's the difference between rules and laws?
Great. I did not find anything on this in this particular Parsha, but we can definitely go into that. There are definite differences of chukim and mishpatim. Yes, Karen. Wow, you're also good at raising your virtual hand today. Thank you so much. Karen, go ahead.
I know this may be stupid, but what are the laws of Canaan? I mean, what shouldn't we do?
Yeah, and I don't think that's stupid at all. It's a really great question. Again, similar to Renee's question, right? It's not specific as to the laws we're talking about, right? Which ones to observe versus which ones to not observe. So it's a great question.
Same for the practices of the land of Egypt. Same thing. Like what are the
exactly? Yeah, I think that's what Karen's asking. Like, what are the things we're not supposed to do? Great. Other kushiot, other questions? Wow. A short kushia section this morning. All right. Rabbi Shapiro. Oh, Denise.
Denise with a late breaking kushia.
So I don't know if it's a kushia or just kind of an observation, but I don't remember anywhere that it talked about any of the laws or rules of Egypt or Canaan. So it's sort of like coming in the middle of the conversation, but we don't see the beginning.
Interesting.
There's like an implied, you're saying there's like an implied sense that this audience of Bnei Israel will know what that is, but it's not necessarily specified.
Yes, exactly. That's what I meant.
Great. Rabbi Shapiro, do you want to start?
A lot of what I have actually picks up on, I mean, I'm cheating because I know that I want to speak about it. Can I cheat?
Yeah.
Great.
I don't think it's cheating if you're teaching the class. I think it's just preparation.
So I'm going to cheat and say that a lot of the kushiot have come up on that first verse in particular.
Yeah.
A lot of what I noticed, and one of the things that caught my eye, and I think we've even spoken about it, I think, intermittently in this space, is this idea of like v'chai bahem, that you should live by, like, what does that mean, right? What does it mean that you should live by them? Doesn't seem to be obvious. What does that connote? Is that causal? Is that something sort of a framing for how you should think about this, right? That especially because there seems to be a good amount of overlap, right, between verses 4 and 5, right? Which on the one hand you could say, all right, well, they look pretty similar, so just going to kind of gloss over them. Or you could be a dorky rabbi and say, aha, there must be a difference between those two verses, right? So like what distinguishes verse 5 from verse 4, and that phrase seems to be one of them. So I looked at that in some depth. That was interesting.
Do you want to just talk about chukim and mishpatim very quickly, but since that's going to come up, my guess, in verse 4?
Sure. I also didn't do like a ton of prep on that specifically, though I'm happy to speak to it in terms of my standing on it. But first, Mike has also done a wonderful job digitally raising his hand.
Oh, sorry. I'm looking at the Safari screen, so I didn't see it.
Mike, what's up?
I hope you can hear me because it says my internet connection is unstable. But
you're good.
What I'm wondering is the rules that in verse 5, you shall keep my laws and rules by the pursuit of which man shall live. I am the Lord thy God. It seems a little bit. I'm asking the question, I guess, it's to make it a kushiyot. Is it a bit one-sided? I mean, do we just obey? Do we have any participation in this, or how do we interpret the rules for ourselves and so that they make sense? And well, I like to think of the relationship between God and man as a partnership. So maybe that's coloring my question, but that's my question basically.
Interesting. I found something interesting on verse 5 that touches on a different version of that, but I hear the question on verse 4 that like, are we just supposed to kind of blindly obey, or is there a sense of that?
Yeah, and I think that when there are multiple moments, and this comes up in the Gemara a little bit, just as kind of a commentary on this particular text. There are multiple moments in our Torah where we are told to not do things like others around us, such that we wouldn't assimilate. Whether that's an actual nation or just the other gender, right? I was teaching a class earlier this week about talit and tefillin for women. And one of the things that comes up when you teach that class is the idea of beged ish, right? A woman not wearing the clothing that is designated for a man. Now, obviously in 2022, that is much more problematic when we're talking about gender identity and just expression through clothing in general. But in the Torah, right, I just wanted to kind of give this spectrum of that it's not so unique that we're being told to only do things according to our own people and not another people. God and our Torah was very nervous about us somehow becoming like the other peoples around us, and therefore would try to keep us kind of within our own confines, right, within our own boundaries. And if I needed to drash on that, one of the things that I would say comes out of that is actually denominational Judaism, right? We actually, within the different denominations, we also keep ourselves closer and closer to certain things, and depending on which denomination you're in, they're different. So I just wanted to point that out, that I think, there are many instances, not just this one, in which we're being told only be like the people who are like you and not like anybody else. And so it is a little bit one-sided, because we are open to people, joining our community and are very welcoming of that idea. But that kind of neuroses of Jews being a small people goes back to the Torah as well.
There's also, I don't want to steal any Schatzian, although first I'll like call out Paula's comment in the chat there, which is, right, Paula wrote, as a new lawyer, I wasn't allowed to wear pants to court.
Yeah.
Times have changed. Interestingly, I'm required to wear pants to court, but that's a different thing. But yeah,
shul, right? Like shul is the same kind of thing. If you ask Rabbi Sarah Baruch or Rabbi Rebecca Schatz if they would ever wear pants to shul, the answer would be no. And not because, Beth Am has written in my contract that I'm not allowed to wear pants to shul, but
also not written in your contract that Rabbi Sarah Baruch can't wear pants.
Right. I was just using her as an example. Okay. I've also spoken to about this. But just that we didn't grow up and we grew up in very different communities, but we didn't grow up in a type of Judaism where girls wore pants to shul during life when you're walking around, because neither of us are modern Orthodox or Orthodox. We do wear pants, but just, I hope that Sarah's appreciating that we're talking about her so much in this podcast. She listens all the time. She tells me that she's our number one listener. But that at shul,
she gets enough of me, believe me.
At shul, it's just a whole different experience, right? Like going to court, the dressing up for whatever reason for girls is still wearing a skirt.
There's active chat about people wearing pants to shul or not, and Tybal just wrote, in the pandemic, I wear nightgowns to shul all the time. Very good.
I too wish that I could wear pajamas to shul. I think I would have a harder time getting away with it, but I do wish I could show up in sweats and a sweatshirt sometimes. It would make my Saturday morning experience a much easier one.
In looking at that verse, I was noticing an interesting back and forth in the commentators that's sort of in a different direction, which is, and that also I think speaks to an interesting contemporary issue, which is how expansive or specific is that verse? Meaning when it says the practices of Egypt and Canaan, is it saying specifically those two places have certain practices and don't do those specific practices? Yeah. Or are those examples of two non-Jewish cultures that you shouldn't then be following after, which you can then extrapolate out to all non-Jewish cultures?
Right.
Is it specific to those two, or is it saying any culture, any people, any nation that isn't the Israelite people, that isn't the Jewish people, stay away from that stuff? And it seems like there's commentators that speak to both, perspectives on that, which, spoiler alert, I am not an ultra-Orthodox Jew. Right, like, I know Rabbi Schatz is shocked to hear this. Right, we don't live in isolation right now. And I'm someone, I think folks know this based on what I've spoken about in terms of other disciplines and other, religions and senses of spirituality, right, that will say, I enjoy seeing the overlaps and interplay between Judaism and other systems of thought. And depending on how you read verse 3, you could see it as a very specific prohibition of that, saying, don't mess with that stuff. We should be seeing Judaism as a much more specific system in and of itself, that we shouldn't be looking at that type of interplay. I don't know that there's a definitive way of resolving that, but I think it's an interesting question to consider.
Well, and it's interesting. I had not thought about this until you just mentioned that connection. That this whole parsha picks up with this idea that Aaron's sons died from this strange fire, right? We don't know what that means. Our bar mitzvah boy this week will be talking about boundaries and how to hold strong boundaries, and that actually allows you to be closer to people. But it is interesting to think about. Then we talk about a scapegoat, and then we talk about tameh and tahor, right? These things that are supposed to keep us close to community, and not branching outwards, right? That there is something really thematic about this week's parsha in terms of whether you want to call it boundaries or just insular behavior or community building, like whatever way you want to spin it. There are ways in which we as a people are supposed to stay close to one another and not like venture out of our different elements to find influence.
And certainly on the back end of the parsha.
On the back end of the parsha.
In terms of the familial relations that
yes.
Right? That you could certainly apply that to the second half of the parsha, which talks about how if you are related to someone biologically or by marriage, you should not have relations with a very long list of people, which we would
very long.
Good.
When I was going over this parsha with our bar mitzvah boy, we got to that part. I always have them read the parsha with me and ask kushiyot as we're going through. And we got to the beginning of that list. And I was like, we don't need to read the rest of the parsha. We're probably not going to talk about this, so we can just stop here. It's totally fine. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's really, I had never thought about the way in which this parsha is really trying to keep us close to community, and close to our tradition and close to ourselves, right? Close to those who are, quote, like us. And whether or not that's good, that is much of what is happening in this parsha, which not every parsha is very thematic, but it seems to be in that way.
I see that there are two hands up. I just want to build on that quickly, and then Denise and Karen can speak, which is that oftentimes this is part of a double parsha. Right. Yeah. Oftentimes it's Achrei and Parshat Achrei and Parshat Kedoshim, and people will. If you stay around long enough, you'll hear a rabbi riff on this at some point. Oftentimes at a funeral or marking a yard site or something like that. That you can sort of see that as a phrase, Achrei Kedoshim, that after death there is holiness, elevation, right? Something like that. Some of us on the call really like exploring Jewish ideas of death and probably have thought about that a lot. and are heads of various institutes that explore such things.
Dean of Death.
Dean of Death, Rabbi Schatz. But thinking about that as well in terms of if we're thinking about this Parsha too as something that talks about boundaries and separation, right? Because holiness is that, right? If you're moving into a sanctified relationship in some kind of way, definitionally, you're also separating from someone else, right? You can't be close to everyone in the same way all the time. Right. So it's interesting to think about that. Denise, you've been waiting ever so patiently.
So I'm just wondering if it's not just about keeping us separate and things like that, but really a comment about the dominant culture, because it's specifically saying Mitzrayim and Canaan, which were kind of the ruling cultures of each location. But then it doesn't talk about Midian and Moab and Amalek and all these other that we know were around at the same time. So I just wonder if there's some kind of issue of just saying don't get caught up in feeling like you have to be with sort of the cool crowd or the dominant crowd, or because it doesn't say to stay away from other ideologies, which it could. It was really about just ideology. You would think it would list all of them.
I found a very interesting, I don't remember where it's from, let me see if I can find it quickly while I'm speaking, an interesting piece that somewhat speaks to that. And one of the reasons that these particular groups are mentioned is because they're the closest to us, meaning we wouldn't necessarily say as modern Jews, don't get close to, I don't know, I can't think of a religion that's so far away from us, but Baha'i, right? Don't get close.
Zoroastrianism.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Don't get so close to that tradition because the differences are stark enough that there would be no way of making their customs into your laws. There's a halachic principle called minhag kehalacha. And a funny way of thinking about this law is that, Temple Beth Am has cholent every single Saturday. Temple Beth Am always has to have cholent because it gets to a certain point where people actually expect it, and therefore it's as if it's law. Now, obviously, that's not the example that they would give in the Shulchan Aruch, but if you do something, a kippah is this. Right? People started to cover their heads, and all of a sudden it became halacha because it was a custom, not because it's actually halacha to cover your head. So that is a category of law making, so to speak. And so it was Ibn Ezra. So Ibn Ezra said, a person should not habituate themselves to walk in this way, right, according to these other peoples, to the point where it becomes a statute for him, right? To the point where oh, I see that they're doing that. That seems pretty close to what we do. So now I'm going to take that on as my own law. So that was a very roundabout way, Denise, of saying to you, I think it has to do with the fact that they're closest to us, as opposed to having customs that would be very easily differentiated.
Thanks.
Yeah. Karen.
I'm sitting here thinking of Kabbalah and the stones that I have and my tarot cards, and somebody who comes in and sages the house, not my house. You know what I mean? Things that I don't know what that is. It's not a religion,
right?
To me, but it might be something that I would think about. It's like astrology.
Yeah.
So what about that?
Yeah. So I forget which Parsha it is, but there is a Parsha that actually talks about not going the way of magicians or what are they called? Sorcerers? Is that the right?
Sorcerers.
Soothsayers.
That is the word that's used. Yeah, very good. So there is precedent for that, but I think that what they're talking about here is more law. So those things would go under a different category at some point, but probably not under this category, given that even if you are to read some kind of
Right.
like tarot cards or whatever it may be, that you wouldn't then turn that into any kind of law for yourself, whereas some other practice that has a little bit more foundation behind it might be something that then becomes a law for you. Maybe some of you have heard of the category of Jew-boos, like Jewish Buddhists. I think it's
the Jew-boo or Boo-Jew? Oh, it's Jew-boo.
I think I'm right. I don't know. Maybe.
You usually are.
But anyway, whatever. The idea is that it's a person who is Jewish who follows aspects of Buddhism. And that probably is closer to what they're talking about here, right? That you would be taking on aspects of another religion's idea of law and bringing it into your own religion and then assimilating towards it. Now, I think that if you were to ask someone in today's day, if they are a Jew who follows Buddhist traditions, I think much of it is around like mindfulness and meditation practice. So I don't actually know that this is what people would consider law any longer in that combination, but that's what kind of the direction I was thinking.
It's interesting. I mean, wow, there's a lot of hands on it. This is not at all what I prepared, and I was excited about some of the stuff I prepared, but this is turning out to be a very interesting conversation, so I want to keep following this thread. Although I think I'm gonna get around. I think I can find a way back. We'll see what happens. It's interesting, Rabbi Schatz, when you read that Ibn Ezra piece, because the way that I heard it was that. I'm saluting Rabbi Adam Klickfeld. The way that I heard it was, sorry, yes, sir. The way I heard it was that you might do something once or twice, but you shouldn't get so habituated to it that it's something that you always do, right? Like it's one thing if I go to like a Kundalini yoga class once or twice,
right,
if I make it my weekly practice and I'm wearing my kippah there, whoa, then that's something that we need to worry about. Which sounds slightly different than the way that you explained it, but I think there's a way of reading it too.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting question. Like there's sort of a new agey bookstore in Abbot Kinney in Venice, right? And I told Sarah I was going there and she was like, oh good, Avodah Zarah time for you, right? Like that if there's a bunch of sculptures of Buddha and there's a bunch of this and there's a bunch of that, at what point do you shift from being someone who's interested in sort of a syncretistic perspective on religion and spirituality and someone who is interested in exploring other religions into someone who isn't clearly Jewish, right? I think I'm pretty clearly Jewish. I think so, right? But the other piece that Rabbi Schatz mentioned just now is at what point does a religion or a religious civilization or a spiritual practice or whatever it is get so watered down that it's no longer definitionally its own thing, right? Because I'm confident that people who take Buddhism really seriously, if you were to say to them, oh yeah, mindfulness, they're like, no, right? And we see that with Judaism sometimes too. It's like, oh yeah, Judaism's great, tikkun olam. Yes, and it's also more than just that, right? So I think there are some interesting questions around how much of the intersection is a healthy exploration and how much of it gets to a point where it's no longer recognizable as the thing that it is, which, by the way, people might sign up for and say, groovy, that sounds very interesting to me, but I'm pretty sure that this verse is cautioning against that, while also reminding us on the back end to think about how are we holding on to that which is uniquely and definitionally ours, and we could have a even longer conversation about what is uniquely and definitionally Jewish without it getting, like watered down to the point that it's not recognizable. I think there's some interesting sort of conversations in both directions.
Yeah.
Renee, and then Mike, and then Tidal.
So this is back to when you were talking about the magic and stuff like that. It just got me to think of does it include stuff that, for instance, the group of people who believe that if something goes wrong, for instance, that they go and they have their mezuzahs checked to see if the letters fell down, or having tefillin checked.
So tefillin checked is different than having mezuzahs checked. Tefillin checked is actually necessary to make sure that the tefillin is kosher so you can wear it. Having your mezuzahs checked is a bit of a superstition, because if something goes wrong in your home, people say, oh, well, maybe your mezuzahs aren't kosher. It's like one of my least favorite ideas of theology. But blame it on a piece of wood that's on your doorpost. Okay. But yeah, I think that's a little bit more of like a superstition. And the tefillin thing is actually necessary, but I don't think that's what this is, because we're specifically talking about different.
Hold on.
Rabbi Shapiro very much disagrees with me. This is gonna be good. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's total superstition to check the piece of paper and the piece of wood on your door.
Yeah.
But checking the piece of paper and the amulet on your head, now that's real religion right there.
No, hold on. What I'm saying.
That's real. That's logical. That's really, that makes sense. The amulet on your head, that's real halacha. But the just that little thing on your door, that's total narishkeit.
No, you're reordering my words. What I'm trying to say is that the reason that you have your tefillin checked is like if I'm gifted my grandfather's tefillin, there is a chance that given the oils from your skin and over time, the parchment then no longer has the letters.
Are you saying I have oily skin, Rabbi Schatz? Because now I'm really getting offended.
It's possible the letters are no longer on the tefillin, and therefore you're just wearing a black box on your head, but there's nothing actually in it that makes it tefillin. What I'm saying about the mezuzah is that when you check a mezuzah, your mezuzah should be kosher when you put it up. You should check it to make sure that it goes up on your door kosher. 100% I'm saying that. But when you go to check your mezuzah, because God forbid someone in your household gets cancer or has a disease or something like that, right? That is superstition, right? That's not checking.
When my brother got sick, they told us to check the tefus on the mezuzah to see if any of the letters had fallen. Exactly. And also they said to check even though his tefillin, like you said, his tefillin were kosher, they'd been checked, every whatever years you're supposed to do. But they said to check the tefillin also to see if any of the letters didn't drop or fall or whatever.
I totally agree with like the problematic theology of, something bad happened, check your mezuzah. That I get, and obviously I know I was being somewhat silly with your words. And the categories of law and custom and superstition are not nearly as well segmented as the three chambers of the amulet that you wear on your head. You see what I did there? I made it still. That was very good. Yeah. That was very good. Right. That there is definitely, depending on how you think about it, that it's not always so clear what's custom and what's law. It's not always so clear what's custom and what's superstition. Right. And I think that those categories of stuff 2,500 years ago were not so neatly defined as we might think about today. That's all I would say.
Yeah. Mike and then Tybal.
To bring us back to what Rabbi Schatz was saying before this latest conversation, when you talk about, sort of like being a little insular and that part, and rules. We are not that far from having the Parasha of Tazariah and Metzora, where we're talking about how the priests had to come in and rectify things and purify. So this sort of is a way of maybe going back to some of that, because if there was Lashon Hara or something going on that made you have quote leprosy, there was a whole process in the spelled out in the Torah for how you bring someone back into the community.
Sure. Yeah. It's bring back into our community, right? So it's, even though you're still talking about in and out, right? We're still talking about in and out within our own space, as opposed to this branching out to these other communities. When you're sent out of the Jewish community, it's not that they hope that now you go off and you live, in a convent somewhere. They're still hoping that you're in the Jewish community, just not on their ground. So yeah, that's an even deeper kind of circle to this web here. Tybal.
Two things. This one isn't personal to me because due to disability, I can't even do modified yoga. But when I think back, I've lost count of how many people in the kind of more granola havara circles I move, in addition to more structured circles, who are doing yoga. And I think there's some kind of bow or salute or something or something. I'm not even sure, but this comes up like over and over and over again as people start yoga, even though they don't believe it. Anyway, so I was just thinking that sometimes it's not even about belief. It's looking as if you're conforming. It's almost like a Morassian kind of thing, though not expressed that way. But then it also reminded me of something it wasn't me, but it was my family, I still think about and have trouble with. My adult child was getting a degree conferred in England. And England is much more formal. You can't even claim the degree until you go through a ceremony. And in the ceremony, and he'd been to day school for 9 years, so there's no question he opted out. Oh, and I should say the ceremony, no choice, has to be on Shabbos, just the way it is. Shabbos morning, we're talking England. They don't do it 5 school days. They're certainly not doing it on the Lord's Day. You really don't have an out unless you want to make. And it wasn't my choice. It was my adult child's choice. Okay. So there we were on Shabbos.
We forgive you, Tybal. We forgive you.
Yeah. And I'll just say I wore, I'm not a scarf wearer, but I happen to have a scarf, and I wore my father's tallest clips on the scarf. So my family, we knew what that was about and why those tallest clips there, but other people didn't notice. I can actually show a virtual background. Okay. So easy for him. There was no way he was going to have the degree conferred in the name of the Trinity. That was, and I'm sure because there are enough Muslim students in England, that was easy, but he had to bow to get it, and he wasn't bothered by it, but I'm still, you start talking about this, and I thought if I'd been in that situation, I'm not sure I could have bowed.
Like in order to get the degree, he has to bow down to the people giving him the degree. I probably said the wrong word, a little aphasia. I can show a photo of that too. It would take me a minute to grab it. He had to kneel. Wow.
And bow his head. And then, it's almost like the English version of Shmicha. Then the official touched him on his shoulders, and that gave him a degree. But he had all these warnings because of various things. He finished, I don't know, May or June. The ceremony he could make was in October, and that's just the way it was. Didn't have to be in the name of the Trinity, and I remember talking to him, does this bother you? No, he's fine. He was fine with the bowing. But
when I was in college, sorry, there's some noise in the background. My AC is being replaced, and it sounds like my whole house is coming down. So I'm sorry if you can hear that.
What's it being replaced with?
An AC that actually works.
Not confetti?
No, I don't think so. I think that there's a difference here, though fascinating in terms of, things that we have to do still in a world where the world that we live in America, at most times, if we're lucky, there's a separation of church and state. That's not how it is everywhere in the world, including Israel, by the way, but we don't have to get into that. But when I was in college, as someone who was studying music, I sung about Jesus all the time. And our alumni song for the choir that I was in for 4 years was Battle Hymn of the Republic, which is a lot about Jesus, a beautiful song, but a lot about Jesus. I sang it in Mass multiple times. I think that there is a difference between having experiences in other cultures and religions where you immerse yourself such that you can have the full experience, and the idea of immersion for practice. So if I had continued to go to Mass after I, was obligated to go to it for my degree, that might be questionable in terms of why a Jew was going to sing in Mass. Now, it's beautiful, and I would suggest to anybody who enjoys beautiful music to at least experience Mass.
But there are plenty of Jews who will not set foot in a church.
Correct. I was just about to say that. So there are, again, those boundaries around some people who won't even go into a church for fear that something will be too beautiful or too compelling or whatever, and make you want to assimilate towards that tradition. I guess all I'm sharing in that is that I think that what the Torah is saying is more so, do not make those things into your laws. Do not make those things into your practices, right? There's a whole subset of Christians who celebrate Passover, right? Because they want to celebrate the holidays that they believe are, the traditional holidays of the Old Testament. And that is the flip of what the Torah is saying, right? If those people were Jews celebrating Christmas, it would be the same kind of issue, that you would take something on as your ritual or practice. And that's what the Torah is saying not to do, and why we should keep our distance. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, we still have a lingering question just in terms of raw content about the difference between chok and mishpat, which I want to address, which I at least want to answer at some point. And I at least want to share one thing out of, look, I made notes, my book and the whole deal.
Wow.
There's at least one thing out of what I prepped that I want to share, but right. Mike's going to talk, and then I'm going to, I also, if people want to stay on after the podcast, I have a crazy story about this. It'll be like a deleted scene from the podcast. I have a crazy story about boundaries between faith traditions that I will not share on the recording. But if people want to stick around after the recording, I am happy to share it. It is. It's
a great story.
Banana.
Yeah.
Mike.
No, all I wanted to say was it's different between what I think there is a big difference between what Tybal is talking about and what you're talking about. And for instance, it would be one thing to have it or to sing in a choir in a church, or to have a degree, presented where you kneel. But what if you were Jewish and you married a Catholic and then kneeled at that would be of a different degree. And I might add that there, within Judaism, there are some Orthodox rabbis who will not set foot into a conservative, or certainly not a Reform temple.
It's also, and the flip side to that is that Denise wrote in the chat. That Denise wrote in the chat in yoga, they now say, bow your head to the light within. Some might say that, and others might say, I have been in yoga classes where they are very clearly talking about Hindu gods, right? Because yoga can be a Hindu practice, right? So I just think, that there are also more and less ecumenical places in terms of awareness around what this is. Lots of love. And Tybal, yes, exactly. Hinduism is very much a poly. Sarah is getting lots of love on the class today. Sarah, who works in the chaplaincy world, chaplaincy has historically been very Christian, right? And she's experienced some really interesting stuff in terms of national bodies of chaplains that have historically been very Christian, and navigating that as Jewish clergy has not always been a simple thing, right? That's sort of like, I'll leave it at that because the rest of it is just sort of her stuff to share. But it's been very interesting to see that unfold as well. Okay. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, we have 5 minutes to answer the question that was thoughtfully asked towards the beginning. And then I want to share at least one thing of what I actually prepared that I think I might even be able to convert into a bow of what we've been talking about. I will say, I mean, it's been a while since we've done this, and it's good to be reminded that on exploring the Parsha, you just never know what's going to happen. Here's my understanding of Chukim and Mishpatim, and Rabbi Schatz will tell me when I am wrong. My understanding in like very brief is that, as we know in Judaism, there are some laws, rules, halachot that seem to make intuitive sense to us. And there are some that are just like, that doesn't really seem to have much logical basis for anything at all. And that is frequently understood as what Chukim and Mishpatim are. That Mishpatim, I have this right, and I sometimes get this backwards, it's like stalactites and stalagmites, that Mishpatim are the rules within our tradition that make sense. Give charity, right? Like that makes sense. It's like a kind thing to do, right? Give tzedakah, right? So that's like one of the Mishpatim. And Chukim are the halachot, are the rules within our tradition that you can't, even when you're stretching, you have a much harder time coming up with a logical basis for that. Like the rules of the red heifer are sort of held up as the paradigmatic chok. Why would it be that you would sacrifice and grind up a red heifer in order to purify the priests who have become impure? That's a chok. How did I do with that, Schatz? Was that?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think it's just different degrees of law is the easy way of categorizing those two things. What's your piece?
I got a lot of pieces. So many pieces.
What's the one you're going to share?
Oh, so like I said towards the beginning, I spent more of my exploration towards the very end of our 3 verses and exploring that sense of v'chai bahem. Okay, I'm gonna brief. I found so much good stuff. Okay, one very, very, no, I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna do the one thing because we're running out of time. Basically, in short, there's some conversation about like Rashi talks about how the Chai Bahem is in this world, it's the world to come. Some people talk about how it actually indicates Derech Eretz, that it's just not about the letter of the law, but about the way in which you bring it into the world. But there are a number of Hasidic commentaries on this. And one of them was a teaching from Reb Nachman, who said, basically, in short, that for people for whom, who see these laws, who see these rules as just being the like rules that you have to do, they have no vitality whatsoever, and they are always depressed because it seems to them when they're being unnecessarily exacting and strict that they fail to meet their religious duties within the mitzvot they perform. That if you just see this as like the stuff that you have to do and you have to follow the rules and you sort of take it on as that basically onerous sense of what you must do all the time, that you don't have any vitality to it. And so that's why it says v'chai bahem. That when you think about your religious life, when you think about your spiritual life, it should be that which brings you a sense of vitality and liveliness and energy, right? That this isn't just the stuff that you got to do it, right? But that there should be that which brings some real energy and vitality to it. There's a lot more to get into on that in general, but I at least wanted to bring that up. because it aligns for me within my sense of what religion and spirituality are ideally directing us towards, a sense of connection with our lives, a sense of bringing us energy and joy and connection. And I would also sort of bow that up in terms of the conversation that we've been having today. Like when we think about what's in, what's out, what feels kosher, as it were, to explore, what feels like it's sort of a step too far. We have the gift in 2022 of being exposed to a lot of different ideas and spiritual practices and other religions. And I think, trying to put those two pieces together, I think the challenge for us is finding the ways that we stay rooted and grounded within our own tradition, in the ways that bring us life, and also recognizing that there can be a sense of vitality in exploring other avenues for spiritual connection and doing that dance, whether that's within Judaism or sort of outside the more formal and traditional bounds of that, and finding the ways in which that can be a sense of v'chai b'hem, a sense of bringing us life and energy and excitement in that way. And yea, verily, may we do so this Shabbat and every Shabbat.
That was very beautiful. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.